Welcome to Tank Talk, where we fuel your curiosity and challenge your thinking. Today, we are talking with Larken Rose on his new film, The Jones Plantation. Hey, Larken, how's it going?
Hey, good. Slightly exhausted, but good.
Awesome. Congratulations on launching the film.
Yeah, it's finally reality. It's kind of amazing that we have a movie. Only took 3 years and some to get it to that point.
Yeah, so it wasn't your first iteration, right? What was the inspiration for your first go around?
Well, on this little project, there was a animated version of the story from 10 or 12 years ago, I think. I don't even remember when I posted that one, which is just a little 10-minute long allegory that uses the example of a slave plantation to tell this story. And when the director happened to be interviewing me for a completely different reason down in Mexico several years ago, we went back and forth. And I think one of the things he said was, well, isn't democracy at least better than monarchy? And I said, actually, no. He was like, wait, what? And I pointed him to that little video. And after seeing it, then he contacted me and said, what would you think of making that into a movie? And I immediately thought there is so much stuff we could pack into that to such a movie and give it way more depth and substance than just the silly little animated thing. And then we did. Like 3 years of other stuff happened, but that's sort of the short version of how it got there. There's this plantation owner, antebellum South, so he owns a bunch of slaves, and he's having trouble keeping up, and they're kind of falling behind, and some of the slaves are getting uppity and restless and disobedient and causing trouble and not producing enough. And he hears tell of basically a consultant of sorts who teaches slave owners how to get more out of their slaves. And so along comes Mr. Smith, whose job it is to describe to Mr. Jones, the plantation owner, you're doing it wrong. Like, doing it by brute force is very limited, it's inefficient, it's ineffective. There are much better ways, basically, to enslave humanity by means of mental tricks and manipulations and deceptions and all that sort of thing. And pretty early on, I don't think this counts as a spoiler, I think the viewer is going to notice that these are all the tricks that are still being done today. And, and I always have to point out, I'm not at all comparing the degree of suffering and injustice from like an actual slave plantation to what we have today, but the mentality behind the domination and the exploitation and that is still the same. It's still the same approaches. It's still, the Mr. Smiths of the world. And that character doesn't represent a particular individual, but the people playing those games are still playing those games and tricking decent people into basically going along with and sometimes cheering for their own, like, abuse and mistreatment and extortion, basically. So that's the short version.
So Larkin, in the YouTube short, that turned into a feature film, and then it turned into a book. Like, walk me through the development of this. Like, what themes? Like, what are people going to get out of all these different pieces of media?
Well, I think catastrophe is the mother of invention, and while we were shooting the movie, and scenes had to be cut down and shortened, and some subplots had to be completely dumped because, like, there's not going to be time. It's not going to fit. Not only do we not have the time to shoot them all because we shot the whole thing in like 17 days, but we don't want this to be a 7-hour movie. So just for time, we have to hack it down. And initially I was really frustrated because, like, as you might expect, there's a whole lot I want to say with this movie. And Andrew, the director, was totally right that there isn't time to say all that stuff in a movie. And so every day after the shoot, we came back to our little headquarters down south, and we were doing rewrites of the scenes for the next day. And then only a few days in, I was so frustrated with how many things had to be cut. And they did have to be cut, but it was still frustrating to see them just getting, thrown in the trash, that I decided I'm going to write a novel version of this and put all that stuff back in. Because in written form, there are a lot of things you can get into that you just can't on film. Get into what people are thinking, what their attitudes are, and a lot more of the stuff that doesn't really show up on screen. And you just have way more time. Like the average novel is, 10, 15 hours worth of movie if you actually made it directly into a movie. So I started writing the novel, and I was finished the rough draft of the novel by the time we finished shooting the movie. So I was very sleep deprived. My immune system utterly collapsed. So did Andrew's for different reasons, because he was frantically working on everything else. But I like the idea because I love the movie for what it is. It's exactly what it should be, I think. And yet there's so much more to tell. And so I love the idea of having the novel that expands on it, and they don't conflict. I mean, there's little things in the plot that change that basically changed on the fly while we were making the movie, but those are kind of trivial things. The overall plot of what happens is the same, but the book allows it to get way more in depth into the not only what they're thinking, but the philosophical discussions back and forth between, like, Mr. Smith, the consultant, and Mr. Jones, and later his cousin, Mr. Johnson, comes in, and there's discussions that you don't want to have too much dialogue in a movie because that gets slow and dragging along. In a book, you expect that. The only visuals are words in front of your face, so that's the place to do that. So the back and forth and the discussions go into way more depth and have, a lot of substance to them that you can't really express in a movie. And so I really think that each thing, the movie and the novel, needed to be their own thing, despite the fact that they're telling the same story and they almost entirely match. They just, to me, serve different purposes. But that was therapy for me while we were shooting, to have an outlet for, but I like that plot, and it was important to make that point. It's like, yeah, but you can't fit all these points into one movie, and we don't have a budget for like a mini series, so I'm going to put it in the novel. So I'm really excited about the movie, and I'm really excited about the novel. And I think each plays its own part. It's not like, well, if you don't have time for this, you can have this, not quite as good thing. Because there are aspects of the movie that a novel can't convey. The visuals and the mood changes and stuff. I'll have to let people see it to know what I mean. But there's things you can't convey in writing, and there's other things you can't convey in visuals without writing. So I really like, the fact that I thought of, well, I'm just going to write the novel then at the same time. And together, I think they go really well to paint a pretty dang complete picture of what we're trying to say. And each one does its own thing independently. It's not like you need the other one to, like, either one by itself does its job, and both together just does two different jobs that happen to, complement each other.
What is it that you are trying to say as far as the cautionary tale to the people who are living today? Because earlier you said these are the same tricks that politicians use today. What is the message of the Jones Plantation?
Basically, I want people to understand how mental enslavement is way more insidious and way more of a threat to humanity than mere physical enslavement. I mean, physical enslavement, obviously, I don't think I need to tell anybody this, is horrendously evil. That's, about as bad as you can get, is treating another person like your property. That's just, that's as bad as you can get. But you can't get away with that on a continuing large scale without using the mind control thing. So, if somebody sees, well, somebody else was like chained to a tree in their backyard and forced to work, everybody knows what that is. Everybody understands that's really, really bad. And the thing to do is, well, you break the chain and run away or overthrow the guy trying to do that. Like, that's simple. What people don't understand, and what I hope this movie nudges them into thinking about and questioning more, is the ways in which mental trickery and enslavement is actually more powerful. It's a more powerful way to subjugate human beings, to basically reduce them into, robots serving their masters, than outright just physical slavery is. Because if you just abuse somebody and they know it, and you're exploiting somebody and they know it, they don't feel beholden to you. And the moment they have a chance to get away or overthrow you or, throw you into a wood chip or whatever, the moment they have the chance to get out of that scenario, they will, because everybody recognizes that it's wrong. Well, the real way that people are robbed and exploited and oppressed today, way more often than not, the victims don't even recognize what's going on. They don't even see that they're literally cheering for their oppressors. And you can, I often mention, you can see the videos of the thrilled, happy, excited, optimistic, cheering throngs of people cheering for Mao, and the crowd cheering for Stalin, and the crowd cheering for Hitler. And you can go right on down the list, because the tyrants didn't come along and say, hey, give me lots of power so I can do nasty stuff. They said, you are being mistreated, but I'm here to free you and help you and serve you and protect you. And so the people cheerfully, parade their way into their own oppression. And most of the victims that still don't know it, and that they still don't understand the game. And so to set a story in the context of a slave plantation, so it's a fictional story, kind of, sort of fictional, so that people can just watch it, but then notice the parallels and start to realize, this is still what they're doing to me. And the main thing I want to occur to people, and like normally, a movie, well, you want to, we do hope this entertains people, but normally it's like, well, entertain them, make them feel good, and then they can forget it and walk out. That's not the goal of this one. We do want to entertain them, but we want them to think about stuff. And one of the main things I want people to wonder, having watched it, is, would I have been on the right side? If that was me in that setting, would I have fallen for this stuff? Would I have gone along with it? Would I have been cheering for the bad guy unwittingly? And because sadly, history shows that most people most of the time are cheering for the bad guy, and they don't know it. And Plato said this 2,000 years ago. When a tyrant first appears, he appears as a protector. It's like, from this and no other root does a tyrant spring. When he first appears, he is a protector. And so this is a game that's been around for ages, which Mr. Smith mentions in the movie. I want people to understand the game so it stops working on them. That's the short version.
Yeah, so we've seen examples of this throughout history for a long, long time, on repeat. Do you think the events of the past couple of years have made it so that people are more apt to hear what you have to say?
Yeah, by a lot. And I get that from a bunch of voluntarists I know, people who don't believe in the political system at all, that a lot of people have independently reported to me that they've tried to have discussions before with people in their lives who just, they just want to live their lives and go about their daily business. They don't really question things. They don't really think about things. And in the last few years, a lot of these people have reported, yeah, all my friends and relations who used to think, it's just some crazy ranting. Now they're coming to me and going, what were you saying about that? So yeah, I think, ironically, the Mr. Smiths of today are falling down on the job, which is a very good thing. It's just sort of weird that they're doing such a bad job of the mental manipulation that a lot of people are starting to see through it. And the establishment is actually making enemies out of a bunch of people who used to be just loyal, obedient, compliant, go with the flow types. They're forcing people to learn how to say no and forcing people to see through the game, which is the dumbest thing a tyrant can ever do. But that's what they've done a lot of in the last 3 years. So, yeah, Mr. Smith is actually better at it than I think anybody behind the scenes is right now, which, that's a good thing for humanity, but it's sort of weird to watch.
Yeah, so in the film, you talked a lot about money, financial enslavement, really keeping people in debt. And at Wealth Battle, this is something that we talk about a lot, right? There's a lot of control through our currency. There's a lot of appeal to authority when it comes to people's finances. And our goal is to arm people with financial education, with community, with tools to fortify their finances and to be more free, to actually have choice. So can you talk a little bit about some of those themes in the movie?
Yeah, and again, that's something that there's a shorter version in the movie than there is in the novel because you have more time to get into it, because they get into, I don't think this counts as a spoiler. Basically, they make up their own currency, and you get to see the plantation version of what the Federal Reserve is doing, and what central banks do when they just make it out of thin air. And most people don't understand it. And Mr. Smith even explains to Mr. Jones, does it much more in depth in the novel, but does it in the movie too, the game that's being played about they're going to view these things as having value. They're not going to understand like the game at all. And they're going to be working really hard to get these things. And we're going to keep them in debt forever. We're going to loan them stuff that we just made up out of thin air. And then they literally feel beholden to us since we gave them literally nothing. Like pieces of paper that we said had value. And, I'm not going to get into the whole explanation of how that works. I mean, there's the creature from Jekyll Island, that's like the long version of how the whole monstrosity came to be. But one thing I love about the movie and the novel is that if you tell the scheming trick in the setting of a fictional story, people can see it and go, oh, that's like devious and clever. And yeah, that would totally work. Like the slaves aren't going to understand enough to not fall for that. Like, why wouldn't they go, oh yeah, we'll eagerly work for them. And then I want those same people a week later to go, wait a minute, and start looking at their currency and go, uh-oh, maybe it isn't just poor uneducated slaves who are dumb enough to fall for that. And so it's a challenge getting enough of an education into a movie or a novel without it starting to feel like a lecture. So we do it in bits and pieces, like in the midst of the plot and stuff. And but in so many of the different ways it covers different topics. Sorry about that. When it covers a topic, mostly the goal is to get people to start to think about it and question it, and then they can look further into it and learn more about it. Because there's hundreds of hours worth of stuff you could elaborate on in the different themes of the movie with the currency and their economic system on this little plantation being one of them. But I wanted to give enough of an overview that people can first of all see, wow, that's actually kind of a clever trick, and then realize, they're also doing the exact same thing to us. And, of course, that ties into what you guys are doing. You can't really be prosperous if you don't nearly understand the game that you're in. If you don't even understand what you're trading with or how debt works, currency works. And yeah, that puts everyone intentionally at a huge disadvantage. Drop little hints here and there to start questioning things is like important.
Something that comes up is the people, or let's say in the free here, they know that inflation is a problem, but with their own economic calculation, they don't for it. They don't consider that. Yeah. So, well, I'll just do what the dude who passed his 55. I'll trust the CFP, EPA. I'll trust the first in authority because surely they have already done all the calculations. They know exactly what is best for me. It's the weirdest thing to be like, I don't trust authority to tell me what I should do with my body and my health. My money, go ahead. I mean, whatever you say, man, I'm all for it. So in the interest of boosting economic productivity for you, Larken, where can people go to see the film? Let's start with that. Let's get some promotions in here.
The film is now live and ready to be purchased at jonesplantationfilm.com. Standard version of the movie is $10. There's also going to be a version that has director's commentary, which is like $15. I'm not sure if they've uploaded that one yet. And then there's one that has the watch party that we just did. But if you go to that, jonesplantationfilm.com, you can see that, and you can at least get the standard version as of right now. And as fast as we can, we're getting the other versions up. So that's where to see that thing right now. And if you follow that site, that'll give the updates on what's going on and other screenings and stuff. So.
And I'll mention this, because you had approached us to help fund the printing of the books and whatnot for the novelization of the film, of the short story, based on reality. Like, how many meta layers are we going down with this story? But that is also available for pre-order now at thejonesplantation.com, which just redirects to the Rose channel, where a lot of your content resides now. So I will throw that out there for anybody who wants to pre-order in the month of August. After that, we'll figure out what it's going to look like. But right now, it's kind of a bulk discount if people want to put some money behind it in tandem with the investment that Wealth Battle is going to make on doing a larger printing to let everybody know that we are, in fact, still on the Jones Plantation. Because it's a moving short, and it's a moving film, and it's a moving novel. So it's really good content for people to understand. So what are the themes that weren't able to make it into the movie that somebody might learn from the novelization? Like, what is the expanded universe if we're going that direction?
Let's see if I can do this without accounting too much as a spoiler. One is the ways in which the real influence peddlers keep control over all the politicians. Which isn't really, originally was going to be briefly touched on in the movie, and that subplot sort of went out the window. Because if you think, well, maybe a politician's like going to decide to be brave and stand up for freedom and stuff, there are really nasty things they do. Like, most people sort of imagine that the politicians are in charge, and no, they're not. And the people who are in charge basically have blackmail leverage on everybody so that nobody dares to actually go against the game. They can pretend to hate each other. The puppets can yell at each other and put on their, basically pro wrestling show. But none of them are really going to turn around and try to pull the rug out from under the system, because all of them are intentionally put into a place that's very vulnerable. So that's there in the novel. There's also the basically the spying on people and the keeping track of everything. That was a subplot that had to disappear from the movie. That there's a slave who Mr. Smith is paying to find out what's going on and what are people thinking and all that stuff. And the funny thing is, I just made a series of just little YouTube videos about slave think, and one of them covered the fact that Frederick Douglass, who grew up as a slave, described exactly that the master would like pay a slave or two to let him know the mindset and the attitudes of the slaves so that they know when, trouble's brewing. So we get into that plot a lot more in the novel than we don't at all in the movie. Like, initially there was going to be a tiny subplot and a character about that, but that had to get chucked. So those two are in there. It gets a lot more into the depths of the mentality of the people running the show. One big discussion that isn't in the movie at all anymore has to do with the enforcers and how it's okay if the victims of oppression get mad at the enforcers as long as they don't recognize that they're just sort of acting as attack dogs for the system. So the politicians can go, we are outraged by the abuse that came out on this video of, police beating someone to death. And people will be, well, then you, the person who literally gave him the badge and told him to come, boss us around, you make sure that guy gets punished. And it's a way to misdirect people's outrage and limit it in a way that, meanwhile, the master's sitting back there, they're not dumb enough to put themselves in harm's way. They're not having to enforce their evil garbage. And when one of their underlings gets caught being a sadistic psycho, they don't care. They come out and pretend to be outraged, and then whatever happens to that guy happens, and there's no threat to the system. Because people think, well, that was just a bad apple, and luckily the system did. And so that's another thing that the book gets into that the movie doesn't. And there's just a lot of the discussions between Smith and Jones, and then later Smith and Johnson, get way more into depth into how the psychology actually works, including like the mentality of, well, why would they try socialism and those things when they know full well that drops productivity like by a lot. So Mr. Johnson's like, what's the point of it? Because at one point they basically swing in that direction while they're swinging back and forth politically. And Mr. Johnson's like, yeah, but they're not going to work as hard. And Smith explains why, yeah, we know that, and we're doing it anyway because of these things. And so that's not in the movie version. So there's a lot, and I can't think of all of them right now, but there's a lot of the discussions that get way more in depth into the psychology of manipulation that fit in a novel and don't fit in a movie. But yeah, those are some of them.
Awesome. Thanks, Larken. I'm just impressed always by your understanding of psychology and mechanics of people and control, and just the way that you present things. It's in a way that a wide range of people it's accessible to a lot of people, and it has people actually think and start asking questions. So thanks for coming on Wealth Battle.
Yeehaw. Glad to be here. And yeah, I've sort of, I did try to set to learn about psychology, but when you learn the philosophy of physical manipulation, kind of accidentally turned into that for me. And I've done it for 27 years, accidentally a whole lot about not only the mentality and the nasty people, but the mentality and the psychology of their victims and why people fall for it. Why almost everything I do, including the movie and this novel, is get people to recognize tricks enough to stop falling for them. So we'll see how much you can do that.
And as a reminder for those who are still with us, that's thejonesplantation.com to pick up a copy of the book, jonesplantationfilm.com to view the film, and to discover and fight the Jones Plantation in your life, that's wealthbattle.com. Thanks so much, Larken. Thanks for the freedom!